Eek, 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 eek. Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday morning here on the east coast of the North American continent, where it is 11:02 a.m. Thanks for being with me. And let me check in. Hi, comments. Hello, Drew, Black, Corky, David, and Clayton. Hi, guys, from North Texas, huh? The bare prairie of North Texas. One day I'll get out there, Clayton. I've never seen any bit of, I've never been to any part of Texas yet. Even though my wife is from Texas, um, it would be great to go out and, gosh, probably take years to see much of Texas. It's so big. Yeah, how's everybody doing? Been pretty active this morning, chatting with Harley Schlanger, getting ready for tomorrow's show with Harley. Also got a new announcement for you. Tuesday a week now we have rescheduled um, Sean Ross of Jure channel on YouTube. He will be joining us from France, and that's why we do the shows in the morning so that the time works out better for European folks. So that will be 11 a.m. on Tuesday, the 7th of December. Tomorrow, December 1st, will be Harley Schlanger at 11 a.m. And the rest of the week looks great. We are going to have Professor Hamamoto on Thursday night. We have the great Mark Kulak on Wednesday night. And I watched his show last night, and every time he does one, he gets better and better and better. And this time he was so well prepared. He had all his slides lined up, and I mean, it was just a superb performance or presentation by Mark at Housatonic Live. Yeah, it's a whole nother country. I guess it is. And Houston. Hello, Houston. Yep. So much of America, and I've seen a little bit of the West Coast. Not too much in between. Pardon me. Finding my way into some European resources on the you know what um, pandemic thingy. And I'm posting them on Twitter as well. My Twitter handle is Late Driver, and I encourage you to follow me on Twitter. Even if you don't join Twitter, I put a lot of my drops there. It's my kind of my place where I put stuff. So, and I know David does the same thing, only he does it 100 times more than I do. Ohio, the rubber city, huh? Okay. So much of this is about Ohio. The book we're reading now, it really does end up in Ohio, because Ohio, of course, becomes the final battleground between the French and Indians on the one side, the so-called French and Indians, and the British and colonists on the other side, which is the part that happens in our history books. We know about that. We know about George Washington going out there and killing the French aristocrat and all that. We know that part. But what we don't know is what came before it. And that's where we are now. We're back in the 1740s, and Alexander Spotswood is organizing a regiment of colonial troops, militia, to go out across the mountains and fight against the French. And the political impact of that on America That's right. Western Reserve, Ohio is from Connecticut, and Virginia also gets extended all the way out to the Mississippi River, which is quite an amazing thing. If you think, what if Virginia had held title to all of that land all the way through the Revolution and the Civil War and became the dominant colony and the dominant nation, really? And Virginia could have taken over everything but New England. Didn't happen, but anyway, let's get back into our book. Robert Walpole, the hellfire minister, the satanic prime minister of Great Britain, was overseeing a great deal of corruption, a great deal of just flagrant violation of morality in order to enrich themselves as fast as they could off of the colonies. And maybe it's a good time to make a footnote here that I'm also studying now the British East India Company in India, and you'll find that what's happening in the colonies is also happening in India in terms of the exploitation. Only the what's happened in India is 100 times, 1,000 times more because there's so much wealth there to be exploited. And that's a story the British don't very often tell. So I'll be digging into that later. We'll be done with this book probably next week. We won't finish it today. But what is the real British policy in India, and how is that? See, this is where my books come together. Where this book comes together with Rulers of Evil, when you see that Grand Union flag, the stars and stripes only, except for it's a Union Jack and stripes. And that was the British East India Company flag. And why would the American colonists adopt that under George Washington and Benjamin Franklin as their flag? Well, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure how to answer yet, but we're going to get there. But that's something to keep in mind that while the British are trying to manage their colonies in America, they're also got this huge issue going on in India where the exploitation of the, the country is just rapacious. And the amount of money being made there by individuals who happen to have control of some BEIC shipping, for instance, is just incredible. And that's how all that great wealth got built up by a family like the Sinclairs. Yes, the Sinclairs that are related to the Trudeaus and Clear Channel Broadcasting and so much else. So I look forward to talking to Mark on Wednesday night and try to summarize where he's at. His work, like mine and George and everybody else, it's always evolving. So you can take a snapshot in time, but then you have to realize that, hey, we're researchers here. We're not giving you the final product every day. We're giving you what we got today. If we had a final product, we'd have already published the book and retired. Hey, Paticorn, sorry, Corn, Paticorn. Nice to have you, Ezra, and Christie's here. Yeah, looking into this Dr. Heiko, I'm sorry, Schönbrunn, I think. Anyway, we'll do that another time. America mobilizes in earnest. As Britain became more deeply involved with its war in Spain, the power of Robert Walpole collapsed. Even George II had demanded war. In his continuing role as Elector of Hanover, he also intended to use Britain against France in support of a Habsburg succession to the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, there's another thing that ties it all together because one of my most recent shows was called The Return of the Holy Roman Empire. And that, of course, is about the synarchy, the Coudenhove Kalergi and the synarchists, which is basically the idea of a federated Europe, the predecessors of the European Union. So that's, they want that back. They like that idea of having a federation of so-called independent countries, but still ruled over by one ring that rules them all, right? The federated oligarchy. For squeezing from Britain the resources for a major war, Walpole was useless. He was swept from office in 1742. The new Whig War Cabinet included Henry Pelham and the Duke of Newcastle, old acquaintances of Lord Thomas Fairfax. Britain had been on a collision course with France since 1739, and that reality made the situation in the American colonies one of increasing strategic importance. Even from a strictly commercial standpoint, British interests could not afford to be indifferent to the French threat to the colonies. As Spotswood had repeatedly warned, the French are extending from the lower Mississippi through the Great Lakes and across the northern frontiers of New York and New England, kept the colonies in constant danger of being overrun. Were France and Spain to control the seas as well, Britain might lose her American possessions. At the very least, she would lose the American trade. In 1740, the French military advantage in America was further increased by the completion of its mighty fortress at Louisbourg on Cape Breton Island, guarding the access to the St. Lawrence River and thus to the Great Lakes. Faced with this worsening strategic and economic crisis, Britain might be forced to depart from her long reliance on French containment of the American colonies. Even in 1740, while Spotswood was still mobilizing his American regiment, a leading British colonial official called attention to the economic stakes involved. His name was Robert Dinwiddie, appointed in 1738 as Surveyor General of Customs for the Southern District, including all British possessions from Pennsylvania to Bermuda. Dinwiddie later became governor of Virginia and supported George Washington's expeditions during the French and Indian War. On April 29, 1740, Dinwiddie presented in court in London a report to the Board of Trade, emphasizing certain aspects of the American trade which were not generally noted in the balance sheets. New England alone had more than 1,000 ocean-going ships, and yet the Atlantic colonies as a whole had nearly 2,000 trading and fishing vessels. The number of British ships trading with those colonies was fewer than 600. Dinwiddie offered figures demonstrating that British dependence on America's natural and improved annual produce, quote unquote, exceeded her earnings from exports to the colonies. Even including that private branch of trade in, quote, Negroes, unquote, and goods sold to Spanish and French colonies in the Americas, British exports could still not overrate our, quote, American trade. Dinwiddie prefaced his report by assuring the board it was based on the best information he could possibly get. He had made a special trip to Virginia in the summer of 1739 when his hopes may have been given a particular turn by Alexander Spotswood, whom he almost certainly consulted. Dinwiddie had long-standing connections to Spotswood and his circle. Born in Scotland in 1692, the son of a Glasgow merchant, Dinwiddie had an older brother, John, who settled in Virginia during Spotswood's governorship. John Dinwiddie established himself along the Rappahannock River within the Fairfax Northern Neck Proprietary. In 1716, he married Sympha Mason, daughter of the third George Mason, one of Spotswood's Knights of the Golden Horseshoe, who accompanied him that same year on the expedition across the Blue Ridge. In 1721, now remember, George Mason is the proprietor of the uh, the part of the colon of Virginia. It's called oh gosh, I guess it's just called Mason's Neck, but it's where Mason's plantation house is, where I've played music many, many times. So, okay, Dinwiddie marries a daughter of George Mason, who is one of Spotswood's Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. Remember the Golden Horseshoe? We talked about it maybe 2 months ago when we were first starting into this book, and it's the collection, the group of people who had gone out to Germana with Spotswood, um, what 10, 15 years earlier, and established a settlement there with the Swiss mining expert and the German miners. Interesting that they formed themselves into a little bit of a secret society, the Knights of the Golden Horseshoe. Well, and then does that not resonate with this with the name the Knights of the Golden Circle, which comes along in the 1840s and 50s as a secret society that not only wants to separate the South from the North, but also to colonize and create slave plantations all around the entire Caribbean basin, including South America, Latin America, the islands, Cuba. All that would have been their dream, to have slave plantations everywhere and just kick back and enjoy your life. That was a dream. Now, back to 1721, Spotswood appointed John Dinwiddie sheriff in his district, the newly formed King George County. Well, King George County is right across the river from me. I can look at it if I go walk about a half a mile and across the island. King George County, indeed. Sympha Dinwiddie's sister married John Mercer. Remember Mercer, right? Remember Mercer, the great um, Revolutionary War leader. Uh, Not the same Mercer, but I think probably a family member. But the Mercers are big in Fredericksburg, Virginia. A Dublin born classical scholar who owned one of the finest libraries in the colonies and whose home was a center of intellectual life for Northern Virginia. And I don't know if the current Mercers, the famous rich Mercers, are related. Probably are, but I don't know. I haven't traced it. If you go to Fredericksburg today, though, you can visit the Mercer Apothecary. It's right down there on, I think it's on Sophia Street. And they say Sophia over there in Virginia. We say Sophia over here in Maryland. Interesting difference. In 1726, John Mercer purchased a large selection of books from Spotswood's library at Germanna. He was also the tutor of the fourth George Mason, who became a leading figure of the Ohio Company beginning in 1749, along with Lawrence Washington. So that's George Mason that is the one that is considered the founder or the writer of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. That would be the fourth one. So we were talking about his father a minute ago. Robert Dinwiddie chose to make Virginia his headquarters when he took up his customs post, moving his family to the vicinity of Norfolk in the spring of 1741. Though his brother John had died in 1726, his widow and children remained an active entree to the society of many of Virginia's leading families, including the Masons, Mercers, Washingtons, and Fairfaxes. Dinwiddie's own association with the Fairfax family dates from the period on a significant official level. William Fairfax, the proprietary agent for the Northern Neck, still held the post of collector of customs for the South Potomac District, and in that capacity now worked under Dinwiddie. In July 1742, Dinwiddie secured a seat on the Virginia Council, despite opposition from Governor Gooch, thus winning a voice in the colony's affairs, as did William Fairfax at about the same time. As Robert Walpole's corrupt system of control broke down, further cracks appeared in Britain's containment of the American colonies. The strategic crisis had far outstripped his capacity for bribery, though it was he who coined the degenerate maxim, quote, all men have their price, unquote. Wow, I didn't know that. All men have their price. That's a creepy thing, isn't it? I'm afraid I have to agree with him at some point. We have to forgive people that give in to blackmail and torture and threats to harm their family. Every man has his price. I agree. In 1741, Governor Belcher of Massachusetts, son of the old grain monopolist who had helped bankroll the Satanic Party, was removed from office. The new royal governor was William Shirley, appointed with the backing of his longtime patron, the Duke of Newcastle, friend of Lord Fairfax. In Pennsylvania, Governor George Thomas, despite protests from the Quaker controlled assembly, seized the occasion of the unfolding war to launch a vehement campaign for military preparedness. In 1742, already anticipating hostilities with France, he also began negotiating a new treaty with the Iroquois, seeking their alliance against the Jesuit controlled tribes of Canada. And here, our writer Graham Lowry once again reminds us, as if to make sure we don't forget, that all of those terror attacks by Indians against the early English settlements, Jesuits behind it. Compare that now to rulers of evil and the idea of a Lorenzo Ricci. Using whatever tactics are necessary to achieve the end. The end justifies the means. And so, I've studied a little bit about the Indians. I studied it at William and Mary. I took a course. I also have numerous books on the heritage of Indians, particularly here around me, with our local Indian tribes being the Piscataways and related tribes. We have a lot of literature that we can look at. There's no indication that Indians used torture before the contact with Europeans. I have a book called The Skulking Way of War, Skulking, Skulking Way of War, which I recommend on that point. Uh, it doesn't blame anybody for the conversion of the Indian form of warfare into terrorism, particularly. But it does document that when they went to war against each other, it wasn't about genocide. It was about uh, usually getting it down to a few champions that would have it out. I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I do suspect that Graham Lowry is correct in that the Jesuits were the ones that were inspiring and inciting the Indians to not only attack the English, but to use terrorism as a means of control. Within a year, British and French troops were engaged in full scale combat in Europe, even though neither side had yet declared war. In America, Pennsylvania's Quaker leaders kept insisting that peace was just around the corner, but events began to be dictated by reality. On August 15, 1743, an order was issued in London directing America's colonial governors to institute broad measures for defense. Word reached the colonies at the beginning of November. Governor Gooch met with his Virginia council and appointed Lawrence Washington, Adjutant General of the Virginia Militia. In Philadelphia, Governor Thomas issued a proclamation calling for the creation of a militia, but the Assembly rejected it. The British Crown had already issued another directive on September 3rd, 1743, that the colonies be placed on a footing for offensive war, but it was not received in America until April of the following year. The Massachusetts colony, which still represented America's most important war fighting capability, was immediately threatened. Beginning in May 1744, the French military governor at Louisbourg launched a series of attacks against British controlled Acadia, that is Nova Scotia today. The main target was the naval port and garrison at Annapolis Royal, the only military obstacle against French attacks on New England from Louisbourg. Under Walpole's regime, the fort at Annapolis had fallen into such disrepair that cows walked easily over its ramparts. Nearly 100 French regulars and 300 to 400 Indians, led by their Jesuit, quote, missionary, unquote, laid siege to Annapolis in August. Of course, we're talking about Annapolis, Massachusetts, not Maryland. Governor Shirley sent reinforcements of Massachusetts militiamen and Indian rangers, and the French gave up the attack in late September. Efforts were also underway to extend the potential theater for the Virginia militia further west by enlarging upon Spotswood's 1722 treaty with the Iroquois Five Nations. In June 1744, Governor Thomas of Pennsylvania, along with commissioners from Virginia and Maryland, met with the Iroquois, now the Six Nations, at Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The Six Nations agreed not to let the French or their Indians invade the lands claimed by the British colonies. More importantly, they conceded for the first time to Virginia's colonial claims beyond the Allegheny Mountains, as far west as the Mississippi River. The Iroquois gave Virginia's commissioners a deed, quote, recognizing the king's right to all the lands that are or shall be by his majesty's appointment in the colony of Virginia, unquote. If honored by the Iroquois, the agreement meant that only the French or their Indian assets could prevent Virginia's developing the strategically crucial Ohio country. Among these coordinated efforts to end America's containment, Benjamin Franklin made a special contribution on a higher level. In April 1744, he unveiled his newly founded American Philosophical Society, which reestablished the institution first created by Increase Mather in the 1680s. Intended to function as a scientific committee of correspondence, it was Franklin's attempt to begin unifying the American colonies around a cultural commitment to reason, the indispensable requirement for a strong republic. Wow. A cultural commitment to reason. Wow. See, that's what we wanted. Unfortunately, we ended up, you know, after George Washington, we we went into the two-party system, and that's where we lost it already. I mean, reason, when you just have to decide between two alternatives, reason is not part of it. It becomes emotional. So that's what that's see. This is my secret theory: is that Jefferson and Adams represented two poles of American thought. Adams, the quasi-royalist, really. I mean, he believed in almost an empirical form of government, and Jefferson, who was the radical individualist. And were they not, in a sense, playing roles? And who appointed them to those roles, if not the Jesuits? Because what happens after the revolution, and we win, right? We say, "Yay, we won, we're free." But did reason, did a culture of reason then take hold? No, didn't. A culture of mudslinging took hold. A culture of negative advertising took hold right away. You didn't have to wait until our generation for negative advertising. And so the control was no longer based upon a culture of reason. Immediately after Washington, you end up a culture of party. And that's where the real problem lies. Okay, the American Philosophical Society, intended to function as a scientific committee of correspondence. It was Franklin's attempt to begin unifying the American colonies around a cultural commitment to reason, the indispensable requirement for a strong republic. He had begun the project the year before with the publication of his, quote, proposal for promoting useful knowledge among the British plantations in America, urging that one society be formed of virtuosi or ingenious men residing in the several colonies to be called the American Philosophical Society, who are to maintain a constant correspondence. The proposed subjects of correspondence included botany, medicine, geology, and metallurgy, new mechanical inventions for saving labor, and such applications as milling, transportation, and irrigation. And I'll quote this: all new arts, trades, and manufactures that may be proposed or thought of, surveys, maps, and charts of particular parts of the seacoasts or inland countries, course and junction of rivers and great roads, situation of lakes and mountains, nature of the soil and productions, new methods of improving the breed of useful animals, introducing other sorts from foreign countries, new improvements in planting, gardening, and clearing land, and all the philosophical experiments that let light into the nature of things, tend to increase the power of man over matter and multiply the conveniences or pleasures of life. Unquote. That's Franklin proposing the American Philosophical Society. Doesn't seem to be a secret society, does it? Seems to be a way to spread knowledge that people happen to have for the good of everybody. Against Britain's cannibalizing colonial policies, Franklin offered a clear program for building a nation. The more widely he organized around it, the more readily Americans would decide whether they had any future under British rule. Franklin recruited the core of the American Philosophical Society from his original organizing committee, the Junto, and its network of improvement clubs. The first president was Thomas Hopkinson, whose son Francis became a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a member of the Continental Congress from New Jersey, and an organizer for the adoption of the Constitution. Beyond the founding group in Philadelphia, the Society's first recruits included Mr. Alexander of New York and Mr. Morris, Chief Justice of the Jerseys. Both were protégés of Jonathan Swift's old friend Robert Hunter, the governor of New York from 1710 to 1719. Franklin made a special trip to New York to enlist them. James Alexander, trained in astronomy by Hunter, served on the councils of both New York and New Jersey and backed Franklin's plan for unifying the colonies during the French and Indian War. His son became a general in the Continental Army under George Washington during the Revolution. Robert Hunter Morris was the son of Hunter's leading ally in New York, Lewis Morris, and became governor of Pennsylvania in 1754, supporting Franklin's efforts to mobilize for the French and Indian War. Governor Morris's son was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a member of the Continental Congress, and rose to the rank of brigadier general during the Revolution. All right, the next caption is The Breakthrough Achieved. The royal directive received in spring of 1744 that the colonies make preparations even to initiate military operations provided a major opportunity for advocates of America's westward development. The Treaty of Lancaster, signed that June, also gave a tremendous boost to Virginia's plans for settling its lands west of the Shenandoah River and far down the southwestern reaches of the Valley of Virginia. Though Lord Fairfax was still in London seeking final ratification of his claims, in 1744 the Northern Neck proprietor authorized the establishment of Fredericktown, later Winchester, at the northern end of the valley. Named for Frederick, the Prince of Wales, it was the first town beyond the Blue Ridge and became the base for further expeditions beyond the Appalachian and Allegheny mountain ranges. The reality of a major war between Britain and France overturned the prevailing rules of the game. James Patton, ancestor of America's great General George Patton, had applied to the Virginia Council in 1743 for extensive land grants in the western stretches of the valley along the later route to Kentucky and Tennessee. Patton reported that Governor Gooch and the council refused at that time to grant my petition, not knowing how the government at home would approve of their granting land there, lest it might occasion a dispute between them and the French. Shortly after war was declared in 1744, Patton was notified to appear before the council and was informed that his grant was approved. The same circumstances finally forced a decision on the western claims of the Fairfax Proprietary, which Robert Walpole had managed to block to the end of his ministry. Early in 1745, Lord Fairfax went before a committee of the King's Privy Council, offering to confirm all patents issued by Virginia within the disputed areas of his grant, and acknowledging the Crown's claims in such cases to any uncollected quit rents. On April 11th, the Privy Council issued an order in favor of Fairfax, setting the boundaries of the Northern Neck Proprietary as, quote, the first springs of the farthest branches of the Rapidan and Potomac rivers, and the straight line between them. Independent of the whims of royal policy, both in London and in Williamsburg, Lord Fairfax was now free to launch a crucial colonization effort across the strategic Western Front, approaching the Ohio River Valley. Well, I think I'm going to share my screen for the last couple of minutes here. I'm going to stop there because we just got to kind of the climax of the book, where Fairfax gets his claims confirmed to his lands beyond the Allegheny Mountains. The Blue Ridge and the Allegheny are the two mountain ranges in Virginia. They're parallel to each other, and the Shenandoah Valley is between them. Let me get this map up here if I can. I have, oh, this is beautiful. I have a copy of this map. Let's see how big I can make this. All right, here it is. Now, this is called the Fry Jefferson map. It was printed, in different versions, but 17, think about 1750 or so. So this is just a couple of years after the events we just talked about in 1744, 5, 6, 7. This is pretty much what Spotswood and Dinwiddie and them uh, had to deal with. And see if I can. Well, these are hard to manipulate, but it's interesting. I'm up in the upper left-hand corner of the map now, and that's where the civilization kind of dies out. But you've got the mountain ranges. Um, all of this upper left is part of what was originally Louisiana, and somewhere on this map it says Louisiana. I'm not going to find it today, but um, I do encourage you to take a look at this map. It's called the Fry Jefferson map, and you can see up in the where my little marker is there. That's where the Fairfax Stone is, and from there you can see this. That is the spring of the farthest branch of the Potomac River, which I'm just tracing for you, that goes down there and then it comes down there, and there's my house right there where the little marker is right there. If if you go back up to the same spot and follow this straight line here, that brings you to the spring of the Rapidan River, which is the western branch of the Rappahannock River. And this is the Rappahannock River here. So all of this from the Chesapeake Bay all the way through, this is what we call the Northern Neck. Okay. That's all the Northern Neck. Now we're in Stafford County, Prince William County, and all of this land across that first mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, now across Frederick County, where Winchester is, and up to the Fairfax Stone. That is a huge, huge advance for the Virginia claim to the Western lands. And now, with the legal authority to go into Ohio and the regiment getting together, we can see where this is headed. All right. Well, that's all I got for you today. For this morning, I'll be seeing you tonight with the minefields and try to bring you up to date in some of my other work. And I enjoy sharing that with you as well. So it's going to be a great week here at McDuff Lives. Please don't forget to take advantage of Screaming Ospreys TV at screamingospreys.com. It's there for you. I updated it last night with the latest videos, so you can just put it on anytime you want to, and change the channels around. If you listen to me for a while and say, I want to listen to Mark Kulak, well, change to Housatonic Select, which is the uh, channel where I've put all of Mark's work that I've just selected some and of course this is all with his consent and approval. So uh, and we appreciate that. Same thing with Harley Schlanger. I also have a page for my minefields and a channel for Screaming Ospreys, which is where I put my interviews. McDuff channel is also there, where I've just put up um, my most recent David Underdown interview. So anyway, it's just an asset. It saves you having to go back and forth on different YouTube or other channels, and I think it's catching on. We're getting about 100 views a day, and that's good. Um, Support me on Patreon. Buy my book. You can connect with the Patreon and the book at the website, screamingospreys.com. And thanks again, everybody. Have a great afternoon.